Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here. Hope you're happy, healthy and well. It's time for a new book review today where I share some life lessons out of books that I have been reading. Now, I have read The Road to Character by David Brooks. I bought this secondhand for only $3 and it was in pristine condition. It was given out as a prize to a young man, obviously at school, but given the condition of the book, I thought he may have just dumped it at a second-hand bookstore and not even read it. Now, David Brooks, I don't know who this guy is, but I looked into him, and he's a Canadian-born American writer. He used to work for the New York Times. He's a columnist and a cultural commentator, and on his Wikipedia page he describes himself as a centrist and a moderate conservative, which is something I wanted to find out. There is a bit of a history of this author and how he wrote this book and what transpired afterwards, but I'm not going to mention it here because the paradox is that if I do, it basically shows my own lack of character in explaining it. So he starts the book by saying that he read a book by Rabbi Soloveitchik called The Lonely Man of Faith, where he described two kinds of Adams. There's Adam 1, who is someone who is success-orientated, career-orientated, someone who wants to build, create, explore, discover. For Adam 1, it's all about being very ambitious, conquering the world. And as you can see, in a lot of our society, Adam 1 is the type of person that many people aspire to. He also mentions that there is Adam number 2, and Adam 2 is someone who is a little bit more internal. He's driven by moral qualities. It's all about doing good, being good, obeying a calling like a vocation, understanding humility. Adam 2 is not someone that we see a lot of in this world, and certainly not on our television sets, and certainly not in our media or on social media, because our society prefers success to be measured by Adam 1 standards. And so he sets the scene of this clash between the two types of Adams. And then he uses a timeline where he explains how through time society has been changing its focus, and what we find today is something less of a character-driven society, less of an Adam 2 society. And so he starts off with the timeline saying during Bible times that it was all about moral realism. It was all about understanding sin and human weakness. And he used the example of Augustine, where it was all about the road to character meant being able to surrender to God, having grace, and giving up your worldly success. Fast forward some years later to the years of French philosophers like Montaigne, like Samuel Johnson, who he writes a lot about in this book. And Samuel Johnson was really fascinating. I didn't know much about his story, but he'd be someone who I would love to read more about just because of the prolific amount of work that he outputted in his years. And he also talked about the writer George Eliot, Mary Evans, who wrote Middlemarch, and even her story was fascinating, so much so that I thought I'm going to read her book. He made me interested in the life of George Eliot because she lived such an unconventional life for the period that she was living in the UK. Over the course of a few days during Melbourne's heatwave, I have read now book 1 of her book, and I am loving it. So he talked about the humanists, people like Samuel Johnson, Montaigne, and also George Eliot. The road to character for them was all about understanding themselves and how hard they had to work to get on that road to virtue. They were suspicious of people with abstract thinking. They were suspicious of pride. They were also people who realized that as individuals, we have limitations to our nature. And I'm already seeing this in Eliot's writing in book 1. So that is coming across quite strongly. Fast forward again to the 18th century, where from moral realism it becomes moral romanticism. So it's less about society and trusted institutions to more about the individual. The Romantics trusted themselves and trusted nature and trusted their own impact on society. They had more of a distrust of the institutions. Fast forward again to the 1940s and the 1950s. At this time, from moral realism, there comes more of a freedom, more of a relaxation. It's all about enjoyment of life because they have been through very hard years and 2 world wars. And so it's not surprising that during the late 40s and 50s, consumption increased. There was more of an advertising and marketing spin, and people enjoyed their life. And we saw that in the impact of human psychology, and that's where people like Dr. Spock and Carl Rogers also shaped organisations in our society in how we understand human psychology. And fast forward again to the 1950s and the 1960s, and then it starts becoming the self-esteem society. It's all about pride. It's all about having a voice, and this is where we saw in society all the minority groups and women's groups having a voice, having their place in society. It was all about self-expression. And come now to the later years, okay, he was talking about 2000s, in the 2000s up to 2015, where he starts talking about where society then starts becoming more about self-expression, more about personal freedoms, and more about this authentic self, that we are liberated when we are able to freely express ourselves and our personal feelings, and that when we feel harmonious on the inside, that we are being true to ourselves. Now, he also says throw in social media, and which then blurs this and makes this big me authentic self into something that blends in the meritocracy, meaning the competition. So all of a sudden, yes, we can be our authentic self, but when we're comparing ourselves to other people on social media, it starts to become more of a competition and not more of a spiritual or moral element to it, if that makes sense. It was really interesting to see some of the statistics that he wrote in this book about how we have changed our language over time. And he mentioned that the keyword searches in Google in recent times were all words related to ego. It was all words related to I, the self, personal. What can I do? How can I do this? What can I do to become better? And it's all about ego. And there was a decrease in the words like morals, ethics, attitudes, characters, society, gratitude, sharing, compassion, friendship. So as you can see, that maybe even in 2015, society was already changing to a more personal, more ego-driven society, and throw in social media and it's become worse. I'd be interested to find out from 2015 to where we are today, 2025, whether that has worsened, and it would be really interesting given now the situation that we're also in as a world, and the type of leaders that we're seeing all around the world, and the type of political situations that we're seeing in the world. Are we truly becoming Adam 2s, or are we diverting completely to the worst form of Adam 1? Some other ideas that were interesting in this book that I wrote down that I saw as life lessons is that I know that some people have gratitude journals. Now, I don't have a gratitude journal. A gratitude journal is a journal where you write down of what you are grateful for in your life, which is a great thing. He said that there was one person who had written what were his errors of the day, and I thought to myself, that's a fantastic way of writing it. What did you fail on? What were your errors? What could you have improved on? And then writing those down, writing what you would do differently. In that way, it keeps yourself accountable. So a very interesting take from gratitude to understanding what were your errors. And I think what David Brooks was trying to say here is if you start to think inwardly and you start to think about how you deal with things, you start to get to know yourself. Yes, by facing up to your weaknesses and facing up to the things that you don't like about yourself and writing about those and what you can do better next time also helps us on the road to character. Some of the other things he mentioned, which I really liked, is this idea that all the people that he mentioned now are historical figures. They didn't have things like the internet. He mentions that there is the importance of having a public and a private life. Many of these figures, if they were in the public eye, they kept their private life private. This is a very interesting concept, especially for a day and age of social media where we publicize everything in our life. We have a part of our private life made public. And he says the road to character is not having that, of keeping something of yourself truly, truly private. It doesn't need to be seen by other people. It doesn't need to be talked about. I love that because it showed to me that privacy is all about allowing people to come into your private world only if there has been some reciprocal action and some trusting action between exchange from both parties. If that's not the case, then you don't let them in. Don't think that this is a self-help book. Don't think, right, I'm going to read this book and it's going to show me how I'm going to build character. It's not like that. I think if he did something like that, it would be ridiculous because the road to character is something that you have to go through yourself. It is an inwardly journey. It is a journey of self-discovery. It is a journey that's going to take a long, long time. It's not going to be solved with 10 great tips and hacks to build character over time. And years of self-exploration, self-questioning, self-critiquing, self-reflecting. In this humility code at the back of this book, there's a whole ton of different codes or rules, I guess he says. But these rules are not things that you can actually, I guess, tomorrow pick up and do. These are, I'm going to call them meditations. If I was to start from a place where I wanted to start from a place of self-reflection and doing the hard work, doing the hard internal work, I'd probably take one of these codes, each of these humility codes, and actually use that as a prompt in reflective writing. I'll give you some ideas of what he mentioned with the humility code. He says the first one is to nourish your soul with moments of tranquility and gratitude. And I love that. I'm someone who reads a lot and I devote time to my reading. I don't think twice about setting aside an entire day if I need to just read. That is something that I feel that I need in my life in order for me to kind of center myself and also leave problems outside. Another one is that we all have gifts and we all have talents, every single one of us, and we should find ways of how we can use these gifts and talents and apply them to some particular world problem. So we're not chasing the big likes or the subscriptions, and we're not chasing followers and building, a social media presence or whatever it is. It is basically doing something that you can help the world, help your society, help your community with the best skills and talents that you have. Humility is one of the best virtues that you can have that sets you onto the road of character. And humility is something that we don't hear of a lot nowadays, and you don't see a lot nowadays, certainly not our leaders. Oh my God, to see a humble leader, many people think that as a sign of weakness. I don't think that's the case at all. In fact, I'd want to see humility more and more. Humility actually shows us that you struggle against your own weaknesses. It basically shows that you're human. He also says in this humility code that the worst vice you can have is pride and ego. And boy, can we see that a lot in our leaders now. To build character, he mentions that you need to confront yourself. You need to confront your demons, your weaknesses. You need to understand that you are a flawed individual. And in order for you to build that up, to to have some self-respect and self-control, you need to share more, you need to be of service, you need to do good, be good, make moral and ethical judgments. You need some refined enjoyment and some friendships. The best teacher you can have is experience as well, and knowing that the more that you experience, the more you realize that you don't know everything. Having wisdom is not something that we can always get, because we know that the world is quite complex. We know that there is no one solution for every single problem. He also encourages us to get rid of this idea that there is a universal solution that could be applied to all different contexts, and that's the answer. And for me, I realize that the older that I'm getting, it's not that I am having all the answers. Far from that. I'm actually having more questions, and I think that's a good thing. When you have more questions, you're able to see things from a different perspective, and it brings about a humility, because wisdom is really hard to get. But what we're aiming for is, I guess, maturity of thought and maturity of reasoning, and a maturity of understanding that everyone is different. We're all flawed, but we're all doing the best that we can in this world. I started to think more about, okay, in today's world, we see a lot on media, we see a lot of politics, we see a lot of different types of leaders in this world, and character is not a word that I would say for many of them that I would describe them. I began to think, who are our heroes? Who do we look up to? And in our world nowadays, a lot of our heroes, the people that we look up to, are all people who fit in that Adam 1. They're career orientated, they're famous, they're telling us about their success and how hard it is to become successful and how ambitious they are. But ultimately, who are quiet achievers? The ones who are behind those Adam 1s. They are the ones that we should be looking for as examples in great characters. Reading this book makes you think, oh my God, all the people in the past may have had character, and that there is no one in recent history, in current history, that has character. And it reads across like that, but I had to kind of switch my thinking and say, no, it's not that. There are people of great character, but maybe they're not the ones who are in front of a camera. They're not the ones who are big noting themselves on social media. They are the quiet achievers. They are the ones who are doing the hard work, and they're doing it without recognition, without acknowledgement, simply for the benefit of their local community or their society, the unsung heroes. And sometimes it's nice to know that there are people out there who are doing that, because we can get bombarded with only one type of person or one kind of aspect of character. So that is all I have to say for The Road to Character by David Brooks. Highly recommended book to read. It gives you some food for thought. It is not a self-help book. It is not a top 10 tips and hints and hacks to get onto great character. If this is something that sounds of interest to you, feel free to read it. Let me know and share your thoughts below. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. Bye for now. Whew, it's hot. Oh my God, sweating. Yes, it is so hot, and we don't have air conditioning. Oh my God.